Colour. In this section, we will be adding colour to our poster. In my work, I use colour in different ways. Sometimes I paint everything with acrylics, other times I will paint blocks with ink and then go over it with pen. And then I also draw lines with ink and add colour digitally. It depends what I'm creating it for, as it all takes different amounts of time. Today, I will show you how to use brush pens to colour by hand. You could apply this way of working to other materials, such as working with acrylic or oil pastels. The first thing to do is to think about your colour palette. You might want to restrict yourself to a couple of colours or work with a broader spectrum. It's good to think about how they will interact and sit on the page. I like to think about how I can balance a page with colour, especially because I often work with a lot of different tones at once. So once you have chosen your colours, we can start colour blocking, which is adding blocks of colour to the page. One of my favourite painters, Jacob Lawrence, would treat his paintings like printmaking, adding one colour at a time. For example, when screen printing, one colour of ink is pushed through the screen onto the paper, adding colours in different layers. So for Jacob Lawrence, when he was working on the 60 panel paintings, the Migration series, he added one colour to all the paintings at once and built up layers of colour like that. It's also good to start with lighter colours. If you're working with pencils or felt tips especially, if you use acrylic paint, this is less of a problem. But you might find it difficult to use a light colour on top of a dark colour, so it's better to just start with your light colours first. And if you want to use patterns that have white in them, you might need to leave white space on the page. You don't have to completely colour everywhere. It's good to think about negative space, which is the white space on the page. For me, colour is really important in the way that I work because I want my work to be loud and vibrant. I'm also always thinking about having different skin tones, which can be tricky because some materials don't have such a broad range. I'm using the Tombow Skin Tone Dual Brush pens as there are a broad range of tones included. Since we're also using water with the pens, you can add colour bit by bit if you want to make different skin colours. You can test out the colours on another piece of paper. Try adding water to them and get used to the pens before you add them to the poster. So I have two sets of brush pens. This is the Tombow full spectrum, and then I also have these which are just specifically skin tones. And you can use these in different ways. So first of all, you can either use just a spray bottle or a brush to put some water directly onto your page. And then you can use the colour on top of the water. And you can just see there, it makes a very kind of diffused colour, which is like watercolour. And you could even choose to blend that a bit more, either with a brush, or you can have one of these blending pens. So it looks exactly like the other brush pens, but this doesn't have any colour in it. And if you wanted to, you could also just manipulate it with the blending pen. And then once you're done, you can just clean off the blending pen in some water like you would with a brush as well. You can also use the brush pens just as they are, and then that would look a bit more like felt tip colour. Or you can use the brush pen directly on the page, and then after that, either use the blending brush or a paintbrush to go over it with water and manipulate the colour like that. If you put the colour on via the brush pen first, instead of wetting the page, you won't be able to manipulate the colour quite as much as you can if you first wet the page. So they have slightly different effects. You can see that the colour here is a bit more muted than where the page was wet first. And then the other option as well is to use a surface, either a plate, or if you have like a piece of acetate, plastic, you can put the colour onto the surface, and blend it with water. So you make a sort of reserve of colour. And then either with your blending brush or with your paintbrush, you can pick up from there and paint onto the page. That is quite useful if you want to mix colours. So for example, maybe especially if you have the skin colours, you know, maybe there isn't quite the right colour. You could see what happens when you mix, for example, one of the deeper brown tones. So there we kind of have a bit of a brown there that's mixed. But you can make new colours by mixing the two colours together as well, like this. So with the skin tones, for example, you could build up the colour in layers rather than just putting all on in one go. So you could work with lighter layers and add if you want to make the colour deeper. So those are a few different techniques that you can use for the colouring, and just think about what kind of effect you want it to have. You know, maybe for the skin tone, for example, you might want it to look more flat like this. Maybe there's areas where you want it to look more washed out, or parts that have more texture. It's a bit more flattering for skin tones if it's flat like this, I find. But you know, they all add a different quality to the page when you try these different techniques. Since I work with text, I also think about how the colours in the drawing match or contrast with the colours in the text. I want them to work harmoniously, so it's important that they go together in some way. Once I've done this, then I start to think about adding details. You can build up those colours and think about different kinds of details you might like to add in. If you're working with something like placards in your poster, it's good to think about having different types of typography. In reality, we all do things in different ways. We write differently, we like different patterns and colours, so adding in these kinds of details will make your work feel more vibrant and real. You can also think about adding in different kinds of textures. You might like to think about things like hair textures and how these can be visualised too.